Cup Winners' Cup, one European Super Cup, a Scottish Premier Division and a Scottish Cup.
Brilliant, that's the most decorated we've had.
I'm going to ask a question asked of one of your Man United predecessors. Where did it all go wrong?
Well, where it all went wrong was Alex Ferguson, basically, it all went wrong when I was...
Brian McClair once named 7 football players who were gutless, cowardly, or simply disposable. And when a man like McClair speaks, you listen, because this wasn't some pub rant from a bitter ex-pro. This was calculated. This was years of observation finally spilling over. McClair was different from the typical footballer of his era. While his teammates were hard men or party animals, McClair was studying mathematics at the University of Glasgow. He watched football like an anthropologist studying a tribe. He saw everything. He remembered everything. And when he finally broke his silence about these 7 names, it wasn't emotional. It was surgical. McClair spent 15 years at the highest level, 4 years at Celtic, 11 at Manchester United. He won titles, scored goals, and kept his mouth shut. But certain names haunted him. Certain moments ate away at him. These 7 figures weren't just bad footballers. Some of them were brilliant, but they violated something McClair held sacred. Whether it was respect, courage, or basic professional decency, they crossed a line, and McClair never forgot. This is the story of why he hated them, why he despised them, and why history proved him right. The first name is Nigel Winterburn, and this is where the word hatred actually applies. Not dislike, not professional disagreement, pure visceral hatred. It started in 1988 at Highbury during an FA Cup tie. Manchester United were losing. McClair stepped up to take a penalty that would have levelled the match. He missed, sent it high over the bar. What happened next burned into his memory forever. Nigel Winterburn didn't celebrate with his teammates. He ran straight to McClair, got in his face, screamed at him, mocked him, humiliated him in front of thousands. For McClair, this wasn't just poor sportsmanship, it was a violation of the code. Football was physical. Football was brutal. But there were lines you didn't cross. Winterburn crossed that line. The resentment festered for 2 years. McClair carried it like a weight. Then came October 20th, 1990. Arsenal visited Old Trafford. The atmosphere was already toxic. Then Winterburn launched into a dangerous tackle on Dennis Irwin. McClair saw red mist. Not metaphorical red mist. Actual blinding rage. He attacked Winterburn while the Arsenal defender was on the ground. Kicked him repeatedly in the back. This sparked the infamous 21-man brawl. Only David Seaman stayed out of it. Arsenal were docked 2 points. United lost 1. McClair later admitted he thought he'd only kicked Winterburn once. Video proved he kicked him multiple times. The rage had distorted his sense of time and reality. Years later, they shook hands. They agreed to disagree. McClair didn't want it to become ridiculous, but he made one thing clear. He does not send Winterburn Christmas cards. The hatred softened into cold indifference, but it never disappeared. Winterburn wasn't a bad footballer. He was an excellent fullback. But to McClair, he was a bad human being in the context of sporting ethics. He represented everything McClair despised: mockery, disrespect, and the willingness to humiliate a man when he was down. The second name is Anders Limpar, and if Winterburn was the villain who stood his ground, Limpar was the coward who ran away. During that same 1990 brawl, as McClair was dealing with Winterburn, he felt a sharp impact to the side of his head. He'd been punched. He turned around. Anders Limpar, the Swedish winger, had thrown a cheap shot from behind. But here's what made it unforgivable. Limpar punched him and immediately retreated, ran away, hid behind his teammates. For McClair, who stood his ground even when outnumbered, this was pathetic. This was gutless behaviour from a man who lacked basic courage. Limpar was booked that day for his involvement in the brawl, but the punishment didn't matter to McClair. What mattered was the character assessment. Limpar had shown himself to be an opportunist, a player who would strike when your back was turned, but wouldn't face the consequences. This hit-and-run tactic represented everything McClair found contemptible in football. If you're going to start something, finish it. If you're going to throw a punch, stand there and own it. Limpar did neither. He sucker-punched a man in the chaos and disappeared. That's not warfare, that's cowardice. And McClair never forgot it. The third name takes us back to Celtic, Johnston. The partnership between McClair and Johnston is legendary in Glasgow. Statistically, they were devastating. In the 1983-84 season alone, McClair scored 32 goals. When Johnston arrived in October 1984 for a record fee, everyone expected magic. They delivered goals. They won the league in 1986, but they never delivered friendship. McClair was a home bird. After training, he retreated to his private life. Johnston was the opposite. He loved the bright lights, the nightlife, the adulation. He was often seen with Charlie Nicholas engaging in antics that eventually required manager intervention. For McClair, this was a clash of professional philosophies. Football was a discipline to be studied and executed with precision. For Johnston, football was the vehicle for a lifestyle. The mutual dislike was palpable. They could coordinate on the pitch, but in the dressing room, the silence was deafening. Johnston had talent, but he lacked the values McClair respected, and that made working with him exhausting. The fourth name is Billy McNeel. This was different again. McNeel was Celtic's Caesar, a legendary player. McClair respected what McNeel had achieved on the pitch, but the relationship deteriorated when McNeel became his manager. The friction centred on McClair's departure to Manchester United in 1987. McClair had publicly stated his desire to move to England. For the Celtic hierarchy, this was betrayal. For McNeel specifically, this was personal. When the move finally happened, McNeel was livid, angered. The transfer fee had to be set by tribunal, a process that often turned bitter as clubs fought over valuation. McClair, an intelligent man who understood his market worth, resented the obstructionism. He wanted to progress his career. McNeel wanted to block him. Years later, McClair could still acknowledge McNeel's brilliance as a player. He called him the best header of a ball he'd ever played against. But the managerial relationship was fractured beyond repair. This was the friction of ambition colliding with tradition. McClair valued competence above all else. He could respect McNeel the player while despising McNeel the manager who tried to stifle his career. This duality is crucial. McClair didn't hate people for being bad at football. He hated people for being obstacles, and McNeel, in that moment, was an obstacle wrapped in legendary status. The final three names require a different understanding, because Paul Ince, Mark Hughes and Andrei Kanchelskis were not enemies. They were teammates McClair deeply respected. When he includes them in discussions of people who were treated like they were rubbish, he's not criticising the players. He's criticising what was done to them. These were the parachuted out players. Elite professionals removed from Manchester United, not because they'd declined, but because Sir Alex Ferguson wanted to clear space for the class of '92, and McClair thought this was ruthless, perhaps unnecessary, definitely brutal. Paul Ince was the engine of the team that broke the 26-year title drought in 1993. McClair worked intimately with him in midfield. He described Ince as a one-man wrecking crew and the best midfielder in the league. Then, in 1995, Ince was sold to Inter Milan for £7.5 million. The official story was that he'd become disruptive, a big-time Charlie. McClair rejected this narrative completely. He saw Ince as a wise head who was removed not because he was finished, but because his dominant personality might suffocate the emerging Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes. McClair's defence of Ince challenges the sanitised version of history. It suggests the team could have remained dominant with Ince still there, that selling him was a gamble, not a necessity. Mark Hughes was next, Sparky, McClair's strike partner in the early 90s. Their understanding was telepathic. McClair's movement created space for Hughes's physicality. Hughes's hold-up play created chances for McClair. Then, in 1995, Hughes was sold to Chelsea. The dressing room was shocked. McClair watched as a world-class operator was treated as a depreciating asset. Hughes went on to have stellar seasons at Chelsea, won the FA Cup, became a key figure in their revival. For McClair, this proved the point. Hughes wasn't finished. He was disposed of to lower the average age of the squad. This was football as asset management, and it left a bitter taste. Andrei Kanchelskis completed the triumvirate. In the 1994-95 season, Kanchelskis was arguably the most dangerous attacking player in England, pace and power that terrified defences. Then he was sold to Everton in 1995. McClair identified the reason. David Beckham, Ferguson knew that for Beckham to thrive, the right wing had to be vacated. Kanchelski's, despite his brilliance, was the obstacle, so he was removed. McClair's inclusion of Kanchelski's in the parachuted group emphasises the waste. Kanchelski's was in his prime. Selling him weakened the team in the short term. United finished the 1995-96 season slowly before the kids found their feet. McClair's perspective was pragmatic. Why destroy a winning machine to build a new one when evolution could have replaced revolution? These 7 names represent different types of failure. Winterburn failed the test of basic respect. Limpar failed the test of courage. Johnston failed the test of professionalism. McNeel failed to recognise a player's right to ambition. Ince, Hughes and Kanchelski's didn't fail at all. They were just in the way, and McClair documented all of it, not out of bitterness, but out of a need to correct the record. He wanted people to understand that football's history isn't just about who won, it's about who got discarded, who got mocked, who got punched from behind, and who stood their ground. It's about the code, the unwritten rules that separated professionals from parasites. McClair spent his career valuing respect above all else. Respect for the game, respect for teammates, respect for opponents who played fair. When that respect was violated, he remembered. When Winterburn mocked him, he never forgave. When Limpar ran away, he never forgot. When Johnston prioritised parties over preparation, he tolerated it but never accepted it. When McNeel blocked his career, he moved anyway. And when his friends were disposed of like yesterday's news, he spoke up, because that's what McClair did. He observed, he calculated, and when the time was right, he told the truth. History vindicated him. Winterburn's mockery is still remembered as one of football's ugliest moments. Limpar's cowardice is documented in every retelling of the brawl. Johnston's lifestyle issues are well-known Celtic folklore. McNeil's obstructionism didn't stop McClair's success. And Ince, Hughes and Kanchelski's all proved their quality elsewhere, making their exits look premature. McClair wasn't bitter, he was right, and that's what makes this story so powerful. These weren't the rants of a has-been, they were the observations of a man who saw the game clearly, who understood that being good at football wasn't enough. You had to be good at being professional, good at showing respect, good at standing your ground, and if you failed those tests, McClair would remember. He'd remember for decades, and eventually he'd tell everyone exactly what he thought of you. What separates McClair's criticism from typical footballer grudges is the consistency of his standards. He didn't pick favourites based on talent or success. He judged everyone by the same code. Winterburn could have been the best defender in England. It didn't matter. He violated the code by mocking a penalty miss. Limpar could have been the most skillful winger of his generation. Irrelevant. He punched someone and ran away. Johnston scored goals by the dozen, but he prioritised nightclubs over professionalism. Even Ferguson, the greatest manager in British football history, wasn't immune to McClair's judgment when it came to the parachuted players. McClair saw the ruthlessness. He documented it. He refused to let the official narrative go unchallenged. This is why McClair's list matters. It's not about settling scores. It's about maintaining standards in a sport that often abandons them. Football rewards winning above everything. But McClair insisted there was more to it. There was dignity, there was courage, there was respect. And when players or managers failed to uphold those values, he took note. The 7 names on his list represent 7 different failures, 7 moments when football's code was broken. And McClair, the mathematics student turned footballer, calculated the cost of each violation. He waited, he watched, and when the time came, he spoke. Not with emotion, with precision. That's what made his words cut so deep. The context matters too. McClair wasn't speaking from the sidelines. He earned his right to judge. 467 appearances for Manchester United, 123 goals, titles won, droughts broken. He was there in the mud and blood of the First Division. He was there when football transformed into the Premier League. He saw the entire evolution, from the tribal warfare of the Arsenal brawl to the corporate calculations of selling Kanchelski's for Beckham. He lived through every era, every change, every shift in values. And through it all, he maintained his standards. That's what made him different. That's what made him credible. When McClair finally broke his silence through podcasts and interviews, people listened because they knew he wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't inventing grudges for attention. Everything he said could be verified. The penalty miss happened. The brawl happened. The parachuted exits happened. His testimony wasn't opinion, it was evidence, and the evidence supported one conclusion. These 7 figures, whether through malice or misfortune, represented everything McClair had spent his career fighting against: disrespect, cowardice, disposability. They were the counter-examples to everything he valued, and by naming them, he drew the line. This is acceptable. This is not. This deserves respect. This deserves condemnation. That's the legacy of Brian McClair's list. Not 7 players who were rubbish at football. 7 examples of how football can fail its own standards. Winterburn showed that talent doesn't excuse cruelty. Limpar proved that participation isn't the same as courage. Johnston demonstrated that goals don't compensate for professionalism. McNeel represented the old guard's resistance to progress. And Ince, Hughes and Kanchelskis became proof that even legends can be discarded when convenient. McClair documented all of it. He remembered all of it. And by speaking out, he ensured that history would remember it too. Not the sanitised version, the real version. The version where respect mattered more than reputation. Where courage meant standing your ground, not running away. Where being good at football was never enough if you were terrible at being a professional.